Hello and welcome to our presentation on cryptocurrency. This is Roger Royce with the Royse Law Blockchain Initiative. The Royse Law Firm is a business, corporate, and tax firm with offices in Menlo Park, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and outposts throughout the world. We are a full-service law firm that services primarily the startup technology industry, and blockchain is something that we're very excited about and do a lot of work on. You can find more articles, slides, PowerPoints, presentations, audio, video on our website at royselaw.com. So if you've been following along, you've heard us talk about an introduction to blockchain. You've heard us speak about the technology behind blockchain. Today we're going to focus on cryptocurrency in particular. So in the past, we've talked a lot about the technology, and when it comes to cryptocurrency, one of the big solutions that blockchain had to solve was the double spend problem. Remember that unlike real currency, cryptocurrency is simply code. It's just digital code, meaning that it is very easy to copy and spend again. In our example from the past, we had Alice spending some money with Bob by just giving him the digital code, the Bitcoin in this case. And then Bob, of course, goes ahead and uses that Bitcoin down the chain to buy further products and services. Well, what is to stop Alice from making a copy of that digital code and spending it again with Matthias? So we're going to talk a little bit about that here today. So first of all, think about what a good cryptocurrency would have to be. First, of course, it would have to be cryptographically secure. And what do we mean by that? So cryptocurrency, the reason they call it cryptocurrency instead of just digital currency is because of this strong cryptography that is used to secure the messages being the currency or the code itself. And cryptographic functions can encrypt a message. Think of it as a really strong password, meaning that it scrambles it so it's no longer readable, and then you have a key that can unscramble the message or decrypt it. That's the basic idea. Another thing that a strong digital currency would have would be a tamper-proof database. We would want a database that's responsible for logging user activity, but it has to be safe and you'd have to know if somebody tampered with it. Of course, we'd want it to be pseudonymous or anonymous, like Bitcoin is, but let's pause on that for a minute because a lot of people think that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency generally is anonymous, and it's not. It's pseudonymous. We talked in the last lecture about some types of cryptocurrency that really are a lot more anonymous because of the way that they secure the code and mask the users. However, that's not 100% perfect either. There are solutions that might be able to figure it out. So when we say it's not anonymous, it's because the transactions are publicly available to anybody in the network. There's a public ledger, so anyone can see these transactions. It's pseudonymous because it's not tied to a person's real name, an email, or a physical address, only to this randomly generated Bitcoin address. However, like I say, if somebody connects that Bitcoin address with the real-world identity, it's not even pseudonymous. So remember I talked a little bit about the double spend problem. In the technology language, that's referred to as a fork. And that's one way that you could have a double spend. And a fork is really just a copy of code and the beginning of an independent chain. So there's a difference between a soft fork and a hard fork. A soft fork means that the new version is going to be compatible with the older versions and just run alongside it. Hard fork is a whole new currency. In effect, the new version is no longer compatible with the older versions. So for example, some of the altcoins that you've heard about or alternative coins, they're technically just hard forks since they're based off the Bitcoin code base. They're just not compatible with that network anymore. That's when it's also referred to as a split sometimes. So let's talk, here's one case, the Ethereum fork. So Ethereum split or forked in 2016 after a very high profile hack of the DAO. About 50 million in Ether was stolen. And Ether, as you know, is Ethereum's native currency. So the Ethereum holders voted on whether to institute a hard fork as a means to return all the Ether taken from the DAO. We could do that. Typically in a fork, as you've discovered from our prior lecture, or our prior set of slides, is that the miners will choose the longest chain and invalidate the shorter chains. So when you have a hack and you have a fork, the fork might be worthless. Well, in this case, the holders, in a show of good governance, voted on a hard fork, and the majority of the voters agreed with the hard fork, so those coins could be returned to the people who were hacked. Pretty sizable minority protested on the theory that code is law and it should be immutable and unchangeable, and that's where Ethereum Classic comes from. So an Ethereum Classic has operated independently of the main Ethereum network ever since. So against that background, let's talk a little bit more specifically about cryptocurrencies. So cryptocurrency is a digital asset. It's designed to work as a medium of exchange, uses strong cryptography to secure financial transactions, control the creation of additional units, and verify the transfer of assets. That's a definition from Wikipedia, but it's as good as a general definition as we found. So why cryptocurrency and why now? We've had digital currencies since the early 90s. They just never took off for various reasons, because of design problems, technology problems, and also it just wasn't their time. Like a lot of good ideas, the timing has to be right. And the financial crisis of 2008 really did a lot to accelerate the adoption of cryptocurrency, because it was that time a lack of trust in governments, in banks, in central authorities became very evident. And that was really the impetus, I think, that cryptocurrency needed to launch into the mainstream. There's always been a cypherpunk community and a libertarian sort of element to this, people behind cryptocurrencies, but a big public financial crisis really made that concern much more widespread. So our current banking system, outside of crypto, if you look at it, is slow and it's expensive. Western Union, for example, can charge 7%, sometimes more, for a transfer of money to another country. So if you consider the person who lives in the U.S., works in the U.S., and sends money home to their third world country, it's a very expensive proposition. It takes a lot of their currency just to send that money home. PayPal is better, but it's still expensive, and it's not universally available. Similar to other systems. Credit cards, the same thing. Slow, expensive, not universally available. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are peer-to-peer. They're open, they're secure, they're instant, and they're free. So rather than walking down to the Western Union, paying 7%, sending the money offshore, then somebody has to go pick it up, at a Western Union office in a foreign country, it is just simply peer-to-peer with very low transaction costs. ABRA is a good example of a wallet and an exchange that allows the transfer cross-border of cryptocurrency from one currency into another. That's the other thing. We don't have to worry about currency exchange problems that we have with the current banking system with a cryptocurrency. It gets transferred and it gets spent or exchanged for fiat in its home country. ABRA is an online mobile-based system that allows people to very quickly and easily transfer crypto, buy, store, and invest in crypto, in fact. So some of the alternatives to Bitcoin, you'll notice that the ABRA is holding 28 different currencies. Well, where did 28 currencies come from? Well, there have been other alternatives to Bitcoin, what we call altcoins. Bitcoin, as we know, is peer-to-peer, direct. It uses a proof-of-work consensus protocol in order to validate the transactions. Its supply is limited, which is important to support the price, but it takes about 10 minutes per block to validate a block. And then in order to know that you don't have a 51% attack that we talked about earlier, and that block is going to be secure and not be invalidated later because of a fork, you probably have to wait 3, 4, the experts say 6 blocks before you can actually deliver the products in exchange for the crypto. Well, that's an hour a transaction. That's slow. It's not as slow as what we have now, but it's relatively slow. Ether, on the other hand, peer-to-peer, uses a proof-of-work consensus mechanism, although they're developing other types. They're about 15 seconds per block, so that's a little faster. Okay, and Ether has other qualities as well. Litecoin, it's an early Bitcoin spinoff. It's almost identical to Bitcoin, but it's become very popular, maybe the fourth or fifth biggest one. And then there are other ones that are developing regularly. In San Francisco, we've got Chia, where they use farmers instead of miners. It's not based on proof of work, it's based on storage capacity, proof of storage, as opposed to computing power. And like the other types of cryptocurrencies, it uses the crypto-economic systems that reward farmers for verification of transactions. Ripple is interesting. It's built on, and it's been in the news a lot lately because of its issues with the SEC and FinCEN, but Ripple is built upon a distributed open source internet protocol, consensus ledger, and its own native cryptocurrency known as XRP, which as of June of this year was the third largest coin. So with Ripple, the problem it solves is that it's really difficult to exchange one currency for another very quickly. In fact, it doesn't always, or doesn't even often happen that you will exchange one currency for another that simply. Usually you exchange one currency for different intermediate types of currencies that you eventually will change into the currency that you want. It takes time, it requires intermediation, it's expensive. With Ripple, you tokenize the currency, and banks can exchange funds in different currencies quickly and at a very low cost. Ripple supports tokens in fiat, crypto, commodities, any other unit of value. Could be mobile minutes, could be frequent flyer miles, and it's gained widespread adoption, is being used by several large banks now. So some of the problems with cryptocurrencies as opposed to centralized systems is it is relatively slow in terms, because there is no central authority or intermediary. It's slow in the sense that you can't get the tentative the tentative credits that credit cards can give, for example. In other words, when you use a credit card, you get your product delivered immediately. If there's a problem with it, the transaction gets reversed down the road someplace, and somebody has to cough up the money. You don't have that luxury with peer-to-peer systems because there is no central authority to police it, so that slows the system down. Like I said, with Bitcoin, you'd be wise to wait about an hour before you actually deliver the product in exchange for the coin, especially if it's something big. It has a worse user experience, for sure. You have to be relatively tech savvy to be able to be conversant in cryptocurrencies, or you'll have to use one of the more popular wallets, which tend to be relatively expensive. And it is volatile, and the governance is uncertain. So as a result, we have not seen cryptocurrencies being used as a medium of exchange to the extent that we all thought it would be by now. That may change, but it hasn't yet, but there are some solutions to that. So volatility, here's an example. I think we all know that in December of 2017, crypto was up close to, it's above $19,000. Bitcoin was above $19,000 a coin. Last time I looked today here in end of November 2018, it was below $4,000, I think $3,500. Now, that is an extreme amount of volatility for a currency. So we just haven't seen it being used as a currency because of that. So several years ago, when it was released, a lot of people, including the Royse Law Firm, were accepting cryptocurrency in payment for services because we thought the value would stabilize. That's not as true today as it was then. So there are some solutions that people have come up with to this problem. One is StableCoin, and that's a cryptocurrency that has a price stability characteristic. And there's a couple different ways that these stablecoins get there. So one, for example, Tether is an example. There's a central authority that holds money as collateral for the coin. So the token, or the coin, is backed by money, backed by real hard dollars. So you would expect that the value of the token would not fluctuate very much, assuming that the currency that backs it does not fluctuate very much. Defeats a lot of the purpose, I guess, of using a cryptocurrency, but at least it provides for stability. And it could be collateralized by anything, not necessarily US dollars. It could be collateralized by other crypto assets. So we call those crypto collateralized coin. They're backed by other assets, so they won't go through the significant value depreciation or appreciation that they might otherwise. And then there is this class of non-collateralized coins. Base coin and carbon are the type where the supply of the coin is dictated by the price of the stable coin. So in other words, just to make sure that the price stays stable, there's a central authority, or a code for that matter, that changes the supply. So it'll increase the supply when we want the price to go down, decrease it when you want the price to go up. That sounds to me a little risky as a legal matter, just because it sounds a lot like manipulation. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Mt. Gox is a good example of how insecure exchanges are. Never keep your currency, your coins, on an exchange any longer than you have to. That was a big hack, about $400 million in the Mt. Gox hack. So what can we do about crypto security to keep these hacks and keep these problems from happening? The experts suggest all the usual stuff: strong passwords, two-factor identification, like the Authenticator, something like that. And by the way, which is way better than just having a text message, because your phone could be hacked. Somebody could get into your text messages. That's happened. So authenticators are usually better. Never store tokens on an exchange. They are notoriously insecure. You read every day about exchanges being hacked, and sometimes that's not even a hack. It's just a fraud. It's just an internal hack that people disguise as an external hack. Wallets. A wallet is a store of the private keys. Most of these transactions happen through wallets. There are cold wallets and hot wallets. A hot wallet means that it's online, it's on the internet. It's a little less secure than a cold wallet. So if you're dealing with a large amount of cryptocurrency, you'd use a cold wallet. That's something that's stored offline in a piece of hardware. Ledger, Trezor, they look like little USBs, or they don't have to, but they're basically stored offline. Another issue with cryptocurrencies and using exchanges and wallets is that once there is some sort of central authority, you now are no longer illegal. You are clearly within the legal system, and that information is subject not only to being hacked, but also to being accessed by a government. So Coinbase is a really good example. The IRS determined, quite accurately I think, that a lot of people were trading in crypto and not reporting the taxes on the gain on the exchange. We'll talk about this in a later presentation. But whenever crypto is property for tax purposes, it's not currency. So whenever one type of cryptocurrency is exchanged for another, that is treated as an exchange of property for another type of property, and that is taxable. Now there was a time up before 2018, before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which went into effect January 1 of 2018, that you could have taken a position that when you traded crypto, when you bought Ether using Bitcoin, you really had a like kind of exchange, because you exchanged one type of asset for another similar type of asset. The law has changed. There's no longer like kind of exchange treatment, so I can't think of a reason. In the typical case, if it's currency, if it's securities, it's a different story, but I can't think of a way that you can avoid taxable gain when you trade appreciated crypto for anything else, including another type of crypto. Well, those exchanges happen on wallets a lot of times, and that's a store of information for these taxable transactions. The IRS knows that, so they subpoenaed Coinbase. They eventually reached an agreement where they access the information for any account with trades of more than $30,000, and anybody who owns an account at Coinbase, it's just a matter of time. You're going to be contacted by the IRS if you haven't paid your taxes on any gains you made on cryptocurrency exchanges over Coinbase. Hacks and scams. As we mentioned, Mt. Gox, $450 million, CoinCheck, $400 million. You'll notice there's a lot of them, and this chart could be much larger than it is. But these are some of the biggest cryptocurrency hacks and scams. Transparency. One of the good things about blockchain is that it is totally transparent. It's public. And the way that can be used is a couple of ways. Number one, for government investigations, if we really are trying to track down bad actors, you can at least trace the source of funds. And in a couple of the big hacks where digital currency was traced to be associated with criminal activity, the proceeds of drugs, etc., the exchanges simply froze the accounts, and they wouldn't allow any trading in any of the crypto that came from those sources. That technology is getting very sophisticated. I'm seeing a lot of transactions where they are simply not going through because the crypto has been traced back to illicit sources or back to Silk Road or something like that. So that is a real powerful technology that can be used. You might think that it's used to evade and avoid government regulation. Here's a way that the transparency is being used to help ensure compliance with law. In a way, there's decreased financial privacy. We're going to have to see, for example, how crypto is going to play out in light of GDPR, global data privacy regulations, as well as other privacy initiatives, including the strong privacy laws we're about to have here in California in 2019. So it's pseudonymous and transparent, but the reason there's decreased financial privacy is that these identities can be reverse engineered on a transaction graph analysis. And that is really powerful and really scary. It's one of the reasons that governments are now getting into crypto. That's why you're hearing about things like the crypto ruble or the crypto yen, because if a government can control the currency, they can control the people. And that, by the way, that is widely for many years been recognized as the #1 best method of surveillance on a people is to control their currency. If you know where people are spending and when they're spending and how much they're spending, you know pretty much everything about them. So reverse engineering identities is an issue for financial privacy. There are solutions to that we'll get to in a minute. Bad actors, fraudulent exchanges. You read in the paper almost every day about fraudulent exchanges. Just take a look at the SEC website if you want to see some examples. The SEC has been drinking from a fire hydrant in terms of trying to chase down and stop all of the fraudulent, bad, non-compliant, or just sloppy exchanges. Silk Road's the biggest example of bad actors using cryptocurrency, in this case Bitcoin, to facilitate an international trade in illegal drugs. We all know about Silk Road. It's one of the problems with crypto. So what are the legal frameworks that can apply? The scale of money laundering has been increasing. Maybe crypto has something to do with that. And what can governments do to avoid the use of cryptocurrencies to facilitate illegal or illicit activities? Well, we have several tools. So any reputable participant in this space now has a pretty robust anti-money laundering AML policy, good know your customer or know your client procedures, and if their financial institutions are required to comply with the Bank Secrecy Act. So in crypto, what do AML and KYC mean? AML, or KYC rather, know your customer or know your client, means that you identify who the person is, and you identify high-risk persons. And that really is done through a method of verifying who these people are and where they come from. And it can be quite onerous in some countries. If you're trying to open a bank account in Cayman Islands, for example, you'll see a 50-page KYC, probably a $200 per person compliance cost to do KYC. AML is not so much concerned with who the customer is as it is where the money came from, where the currency came from. Money laundering is the practice of disguising the source of funds. And you would want to do that if it's an illegal or illicit source or if it avoided some tax regime. Anti-money laundering is procedures that you put in place to identify the source of funds, and you just don't do business with people who provide you with illegal funds. And if you do, and if you're subject to regulation or law, you're going to be in as much trouble as they were. So most people reputable companies who want to deal in the space have really good KYC AML programs in place. And then the final one, reporting suspicious transactions. The Bank Secrecy Act requires financial institutions to do that, to report suspicious transactions, and also transactions over certain amounts. So these days there are technology solutions. Here are two of them. There's several of them. Here's two that Comply Advantage and Identity Mine Global, which will outsource and through technology will handle AML and KYC. And it can really just be coded right into the tokens these days. So the Bank Secrecy Act is the concept that financial institutions have to share customer information with FinCEN. FinCEN is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It's under the U.S. Department of Treasury. And they regulate virtual currency just like any other currency. I mentioned Ripple earlier. Here's an example. Ripple was fined for violating Bank Secrecy Act requirements because the FinCEN found that they were acting as a money services business without registering and maintaining an adequate anti-money laundering program. So there are ways around this that, as you can imagine, some of the technologists have come up with. Privacy coins and zero-knowledge proofs. And this has been around forever. So a zero-knowledge protocol is just a method where somebody can prove to another party that something's true without revealing any information other than the fact that the statement is true. So in blockchain, that means that you can see that an asset, the detail, in other words, typically in blockchain, you can see the sender's address, the receiver's address, the amount being sent. With a zero-knowledge proof or a privacy coin, the public can't see that. They can see a transaction took place, but they can't see anything about the sender, the recipient, the quantity, and there's some legitimate uses for this. Number one, we have a problem called front running in this, and front running means that somebody sees a transaction is about to take place. Remember, it takes 10 minutes, sometimes an hour, to conclude, so they can rush out and trade on that information. So this can avoid that problem. So that's a legitimate use. Here's a few of the cryptos that are using zero-knowledge proofs, how they're using them, and they all do it a little bit differently. Zcash, probably the most prominent one. It uses a special zero-knowledge proof called ZK Snarks. Monero is very well known. It has a hashing algorithm that basically hashes again and disguises the identity of the transaction. And there are other systems that use different ways to disguise the identity, amount, or source or destination of coins. And they make these coins anonymous, untraceable. Dash is one, Zcoin is one. A lot of these technologies are coming out of Israel, since it's known as the nation for having the best cryptography researchers and developers. Here's a currency, here's an overview. Here are the top currencies. I don't know if this is still true, but as of the date that I pulled this slide from CoinGecko, Bitcoin, Ripple, Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash. You see Litecoin's down there at number 6. So this is going to change regularly. Notice the average block time. 10 minutes for Bitcoin, Ripple 3.5 seconds, Ethereum 15 seconds. Where's Litecoin? 2.5 minutes for Litecoin. So it varies pretty widely. And generally, the longer it takes, you might think that as being the more secure it is, but that's not a perfect analogy or a perfect comparison either. Whoops, one too many. Crypto exchanges. So here are some of the top crypto exchanges that we've seen. Binance is probably by far the biggest one. The problem with crypto exchanges is I haven't seen one that, well, I shouldn't say that, because by the time I publish this, there probably will be exchanges that are SEC compliant. Let's just say that it's very difficult for a crypto exchange to be SEC compliant. They've been turning down applications right and left because these exchanges are not adequately complying with Know Your Customer laws, and it's really hard for them to do so, as you can imagine. Some of the currency exchanges I see on here definitely are compliant. They're in the system. They do everything right. A lot of them are not, so just so you know. So where's Bitcoin legal? Where is it not legal? Some countries, here's a really good chart, permissive, contentious, some legal restrictions like China. In some places, they've just tried to prohibit it entirely. Notice Russia is kind of interesting, very contentious, because as you can imagine, cryptocurrency can underline their entire economy. Same with China, kind of undermines the whole economy. But as I've said, these countries have been getting into the act of developing their own currencies. Recent volatility, notice how much more volatile it is than gold or even the S&P. So let's talk about that authoritarian government cryptocurrencies, because that may be the future. There have been several tries at that in the past, experiments we'll call it, for currencies to compete with Bitcoin, but they weren't blockchain. They were really just shared ledgers, or centralized ledgers, I should say, and they just didn't work. And what we found in some of these places, especially, well, Ecuador is a good example, countries that had weak currencies or volatile currencies, once the government, there's a reason they had volatile currencies. You know, once the same government got involved in cryptocurrency, you saw the kind of manipulation that resulted in a real loss of confidence. So it just didn't work. The petro was an interesting idea, but was more to avoid U.S. sanction than it was to create a petroleum-backed token. But there are countries that are developing their own cryptocurrencies, and like I say, Russia and China, I think part of that is that if you can't beat them, you better join them. And they definitely are not beating them in terms of currencies and cryptocurrencies. And if you can have something that has some government involvement behind it, like I say, then you can track your people. And Russia and China are very interested in that. So the takeaways here for today, I would mention that I believe that the financial crisis is what has given rise to Bitcoin, plus it's a perfect storm of having the right public mood for a cryptocurrency, the technology finally coming along, and the business models and crypto economics finally being developed where it can take off and get that network effect that we've talked about. We've talked a little bit about the problems with cryptocurrency, plenty of bad actors, in ways that we find that dance being played out every day with bad actors and government and systems shutting down bad actors. I would have to say, as a practical matter, I have seen that the legal framework's working very well. KYC, AML, and BSA, they work very well for people who are interested in being compliant. They don't work well at all for bad actors, people who have no interest in being compliant and just want to operate illegally until they get caught or shut down. Talked about zero knowledge proofs, dealing with some of these identity issues, and also some of the top cryptocurrencies and the authoritarian government cryptocurrencies that we're going to be seeing coming along. In our next presentation, we're going to talk about smart contracts and how that applies to provide cheap verification, reduce costs, automate many routine functions, how it works. Thank you. I'm Roger Royse with the Royse Law Blockchain Initiative. Thank you for logging in. If you like what you hear and if you want more information from our research and presentations, please log into our website at rroyselaw.com or just Google the Royse Law Blockchain Initiative.